Hi, I'm Rachel from Rose Acres Farmley, and I hope everyone is doing well. So, today we're going to finish our study of Esther. We'll be in Esther 9 and 10, and we'll finish that up. If there's any other book that you have a preference of me doing, just let me know. Put it in the comments below. And in the meantime, I'll be trying to decide where we want to go next. And let's just go ahead and start with a quick prayer, asking God to show us what He would like us to see from His Word. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this day, and thank you for your Word, and thank you that you have given that to us, dear Lord. It's your love letter to us, and I just pray that as we read it, that we would notice things in it that you would have us to see. And I pray that we wouldn't use our own understanding, but that we would lean on you to show us and reveal to us what you want us to see and how that it can apply in our lives. And I just thank you so much for all of your blessings and just being so awesome and so mighty and so patient and kind with us. And I just pray all of this in your precious holy name. Amen. So we're going to be in Esther chapter 9 and 10. The first 5 verses of Esther 9 say, Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed. On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could withstand them, because fear of them fell upon all people. And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and all those doing the king's work helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai became increasingly prominent. Thus the Jews defeated all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, with slaughter and destruction, and did what they pleased with those who hated them. The day arrives when the enemies of the Jews were going to defeat them. But that didn't happen. In fact, the opposite happened. The Jews definitely had enemies who wanted to destroy them. They had someone greater on their side, though, the king, with all his resources. With a king for them, it didn't matter who was against them. Fear of the Jews fell on all of the people around, even on the officials, the satraps, the governors. All these mighty people were fearful of the Jews. Mordecai, who was once just a nobody, all of a sudden rose to fame and greatness. Those who hated the Jews, they were being killed. Just like the Jews, we have enemies to deal with, but we have a mightier king than Xerxes. We have the King of Kings on our side. We have no reason to fear. Romans 8:31. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? So let's look at verse 6 through 17. And in Shushan, the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Also Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Paratha, Adelia, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arasai, Aradai, and Vajesatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, they killed. But they did not lay a hand on the plunder. At the king's invitation, Esther asked for the complete defeat of all the enemies of the Jews. On that day, the number of those who were killed in Shushan the citadel was brought to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the citadel, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. Or what is your further request? It shall be done. Then Esther said, If it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do again tomorrow according to today's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded this to be done. The decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together again on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives, had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And on the 14th day of the month they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Haman's sons and 500 men were killed by the Jews. And then the king asked Esther if she has any further request. She asked for the Jews who were in Shushan to have another day to kill their enemies. The 14th day of Adar. Haman's sons, they had already been killed, but Esther wants their dead bodies to be hanged. Who were Haman and his sons? They were descendants of the ancient Amalekites. God commanded Saul, the son of Kish, to execute the full extent of God's judgment against the Amalekites. Saul did not kill King Agag, and he took some of the possessions of the Amalekites. God had told him to kill everyone and not take any plunder. Samuel ends up killing King Agag and reprimanding Saul. Obviously, some of the Amalekites were able to escape because they continued to harass and plunder the Israelites for hundreds of years. 1 Samuel 30 reports an Amalekite raid on Ziklag, a Judean village where David held property. The Amalekites burned the village and took captive all the women and children, including 2 of David's wives. David and his men defeated the Amalekites and rescued all the hostages. A few hundred Amalekites escaped, however. Much later, during the reign of King Hezekiah, a group of Simeonites killed the remaining Amalekites who had been living in the hill country of Seir. In Esther, we find the final mention of the Amalekites. Mordecai, a descendant of the tribe of Benjamin, son of Kish, and descendant of King Saul, completed God's judgment against the Amalekites. Some people criticize Esther, saying she showed a lack of love toward her enemies, but she displayed the same principle found so often in Joshua. She would not settle for less than total victory. This was an act of judgment by God, not Esther. Haman and his sons were a representation of all the Amalekites who had been torturing and harassing God's people. We see that this was absolutely done in obedience because the Jews took nothing. It allows King Saul's descendants to make restitution for the disobedience Saul had shown back in 1 Samuel chapter 15. Spurgeon said, "Now it was God's intent that a last conflict should take place between Israel and Amalek. The conflict which began with Joshua in the desert was to be finished by Mordecai in the king's palace." Verse 18 through 19. But the Jews who were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day, as well as on the 14th. And on the 15th of the month they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who dwelt in the unwalled towns celebrated the 14th day of the month of Adar with gladness and feasting, as a holiday, and for sending presents to one another. The Jews who were at Shushan continued to fight on the 14th day, and on the 15th day they were able to rest and have a feast to celebrate the victory that God had given them. The rest of the Jews had already begun their holiday on the 14th day in celebration of the defeat of their enemies. Verse 20 through 32. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews near and far, who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the days on which the Jews had rest from their enemies, as the month which is turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, of sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted the custom which they had begun, as Mordecai had written to them, because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them, and had cast that is the lot, to consume them and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letter that this wicked plot which Haman had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. So they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter and what had happened to them, the Jews established and imposed it upon themselves and their descendants and all who would join them, that without fail they should celebrate these 2 days every year, according to the written instructions, and according to the prescribed time, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, that these days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews, and that the memory of them should not perish among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed time, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had prescribed for them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their descendants concerning matters of their fasting and lamenting. So the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. So Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews, near and far, who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly. The principle of remembering God's great deliverance is good. We too often forget his great works. So the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim. Today, Purim is one of the more popular Jewish feasts, with costumes, games, and plenty of noise. They serve these cookies called Haman's ears, and people dress up and they play the parts of Esther, Mordecai, the king, and even Haman. Esther chapter 10, verse 1 through 2. And King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. Now all the acts of his power and his might, in the account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews, and well received by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to all his countrymen. And so that is Esther chapter 10. It's very short. The book of Esther, it shows how the hand of God can move in a supernaturally natural way. Spurgeon said that the book of Esther is a record of wonders without a miracle, and therefore, though equally revealing the glory of the Lord, it sets it forth in another fashion from that which is displayed in the overthrow of Pharaoh by miraculous power. So if we look at Esther, think of all that God arranged in the story of Esther. He arranged for Vashti to lose her place. He arranged for a competition to replace Queen Vashti. He arranges for Esther to enter that competition. He arranged special favor for Esther among the other women. And he arranged for Mordecai to have access to both Esther and the affairs of the kingdom. God arranged the lot that was cast to give 11 months' warning before the planned massacre. God arranged the command that the Jews be killed by private hands instead of by the army of Persia, which would have been much more difficult to stop. God arranged that Haman restrain his anger and not kill Mordecai immediately. God arranged for Esther to delay her request, first asking for a banquet with the king, and then another banquet. God arranged for Haman's anger to come to a peak on one particular day. God arranged for Ahasuerus to have a sleepless night, and he arranged for Ahasuerus to send for a certain book during this sleepless night, and to listen to the passage about Mordecai in that particular book. God's hand in history doesn't cancel out humans, our actions. The actions of Esther and Mordecai were critical to the preservation of the people of God. God used them to accomplish it. If they hadn't been the kind of people they were that leaned on God, he couldn't have used them. He would have found someone because this was his plan. But they were the ones he chose because he knew that they would be willing and that they would be wise and discerning and that they would listen to him. God's will be accomplished. It doesn't excuse those who do evil, but also those who are willing to do good. God will get the glory, but it also pleases him when we are willing to be used. So that's all for Esther. I did not want to finish Esther, obviously, because I waited a while to complete this. Esther is just one of my favorite books. That is all of Esther, and if you would like me to do another book specifically, just put it in the comments and I'll consider it. Um, and I'll be seeing you again whenever I choose which book of the Bible or whenever God shows me which book of the Bible to do next. So I hope each of you have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye bye.